So, hi guys, sorry for that slight delay. I'm really happy that you guys are back for the webinar, the weekly webinar series of Effectory, your weekly dose of inspiration for leadership, for HR management, and for everything related to the effectiveness of your company or for your teams. In the past weeks, we had different speakers that together formed a really compelling story about how to manage your people in these times of crisis, but also in other moments when, well, business might be pressured. Businesses are developing. You need to be agile, flexible as a company. And how do you deal with that situation? Our speakers have looked at that and have tried to guide you through that momentum. So Guido Heze, he talked about managing people in crisis. Axel shared how to keep your people engaged. Tom Haak, he shared how to use a crisis as an accelerator and what kind of trends are influencing HR at the moment. We had Mark Tichelaar looking at focus and productivity, how to keep productive while working from home. He was sharing his story last week. And of course, Kilian Wawu, who shared his vision and his story about performance management. How does that look like for the future? My name is Arjen Swank. I'm the host of this weekly webinar series, and I'm really proud to introduce Ricardo Troiano. He's the head of effectiveness, head of change for Syngenta, a global company operating in over 90 countries in agriculture, seed production. He will give a more in-depth introduction for himself, but just for you to know, he will share in the next 20, 30 minutes about how to guide your organization and look at culture. So how do you keep culture alive, or how do you keep the topic of culture alive in these times of adversity? How do you make this topic relevant, important, and how do you guide change? Ricardo is just coming in from a leadership meeting at Syngenta with the board there. So he's just really live popping in right now. Ricardo, I'm really happy that you're here. Maybe just as a first introduction, you can briefly introduce yourself and also tell us, okay, how's it been for you the last few weeks?
Yeah, thanks, Arjen. Hope everyone is well out there. So, a bit on me. As Arjen mentioned, I head change and org effectiveness in Syngenta for 4 years now in industry. Before that, 20 years in consulting. So big consulting firms. Have lived in 3 different continents, worked across a lot of different countries. So. Worked quite a bit in this space, and it's been going well. I'm one of I have to say I'm privileged enough to be home and safe with the family, knowing that there's so many folks out there, certainly in the healthcare industry, but even within our companies, right, keeping our supply chains going. For us, a lot of our R&D folks that are having to leave their families and go into an office environment or a production environment still. So, my mind and heart is definitely with them. But so far it's been going well, and it's been an incredible time for learning, I'd have to say.
I can imagine. And I think you're calling in from Basel right now. Is there anything in Switzerland that you say, or the way that you've been leading the office in Switzerland that you think is notable, maybe an example for the rest of the world that you can share?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, and specifically today we're speaking of culture, the culture in Switzerland, I've been here now 4 years, there's a level of looking out for the community and compliance, right, following the rules. And I think that's helped tremendously in these times. So I would say if there's anything to do is, it's just almost like wearing the masks we've seen. A lot of people are saying, well, you shouldn't wear a mask. It doesn't really do anything. Well, it's not necessarily to protect yourself. It's often to protect others, right? So this kind of community thinking and supporting, I think, is quite admirable.
Great, cool. I think it's valuable to hear those perspectives from around the world. We have viewers from around the world dialing in. They probably have their own vision on this as well. So, guys, I'm just calling you to also share whatever perspectives, but also, of course, whatever questions you have for Ricardo for the next session. So you can always share those questions in the forum below. And we will try to answer all of them live, or most probably also get back to you later in the terms of amount of questions we've received so far. So keep asking us. Ricardo will share a presentation, and then we will do a live Q&A afterwards. So you can always answer your questions then as well. And you will receive the recording for this webinar in your email with a link. By now, I think you are familiar with the process, but also find it on the YouTube channels of Effectory. All right. No further ado, Ricardo, I'm going over to you. Please, take us along in what you've been going through in the last weeks and also for the future.
Yeah, thanks, Arjen. And again, as things come in, if you want to pause me or stop, rewind, fast forward, just let me know, and we can do that.
Sure.
I think the focus here, as Arjen said on culture is, you've probably heard adversity reveals character, right? When something really becomes hard in individuals. So here's an opportunity to potentially accelerate in difficult times what you're thinking about in the culture. And I know you might have seen out there initially when we talked about this talk, it was going to be about agility. At some level, it is, because the culture we're looking at is around customer centricity and is around agility. So that actually plays a pretty important role. So I want to discuss a little bit about culture, about beliefs, about behaviors that make this up, and how we go about leaning into this. Very quickly, I want to touch on Syngenta, and I know Arjen mentioned it, right? We work on 90 plus countries, a lot of production sites, as I said, folks really working hard. A lot of research and R&D, again, folks going into an environment still, 27,000 employees, but there's a shift, right? So we're merging with some of our sister companies, creating what we call Syngenta Group, considerably larger, right? So you see 4 business units there. We're looking at 48,000 people, right? So this becomes quite big. And when you think of culture shifting, it becomes a big thing. I came from IBM in the past where we were closer to 400,000 people. And as you scale, culture becomes an even bigger driver, I think, of how you can move forward. So that's us, and again, Arjen mentioned it, but our impact, our ambition is to support and help farmers everywhere. And that's a key thing. And I hope a lot of you have now, as you've gotten to your supermarkets, however, hopefully you've been getting to food, you understand that the farmers aren't slowing or stopping in these instances. They need to plant, they need to harvest, they need to get out there and work their fields to continue the safe production and supply of food to the rest of the world, right? So they're working out there, and we're doing our best as an essential company, has been deemed this, to really support those farmers out there. So that's a key aspect for us. And in doing so, we really are focusing on the customer, again, the farmer, and how do we get more agile to support their needs? And no better time than now. Before I do want to take a quick step and define culture. Right, you hear a lot of different definitions. It's what we do around here, is what people will often say. I'm borrowing one from my colleagues and friends at Walking the Talk, and this one always struck me as really interesting, right? And I'll build it for you. It's the pattern of behaviors, right? Key is pattern, not just one or two things you see. It's a pattern of behaviors that are encouraged, discouraged, or tolerated by people and systems, right? So it's not just a people thing necessarily over time. So these are things that play out, and hence why it's so difficult to, for example, shift aspects of your culture. So an example might be, imagine a culture that's very compassionate and people-focused, right? So they might encourage collaboration with colleagues. They might discourage individual heroics, right, of trying to do things or exclusionary practices. And they wouldn't tolerate disrespectful behavior, right? And it's embedded in people, obviously. Leader behaviors make up a big aspect of it, and manager behaviors, but also systems. How do we recognize and reward people? How do we actually bring them in? How do we look at talent? And again, how this plays out over time. So just keep that in the back of your head as you're thinking, okay, it's actually a pattern. So in order to shift anything in a culture, we need to ensure and understand that it's going to happen over time, that it has to be a recognizable pattern of behaviors, and that we actually can architect this in people and systems through how we encourage or discourage things, or how we tolerate those around us, right? The other thing to note is that they say to really shift the culture, once you start introducing new things, there's a tipping point. About 15-20% of people who start acting in this way before the system starts changing. So what does that mean? That means, if there's 10 of us in a room and we say we have to change the culture to be more, fill in the blank, right? More compassionate. Only 2 of those people will already start working in this ways. And the rest of the people will say, nah, I don't know if that's important. I don't know if I buy that, So for the 2, they're saying, well, maybe this isn't taking hold, right? So we really need to ensure that we move away from the posters on the wall to say, oh, okay, are we supposed to follow that? And really get into the behaviors. So I want to talk a little bit about how that gets built up, right? And this, I'm talking about organizations, obviously, but this is a very personal view as well, right? This is how we actually drive some of our outcomes in life, right? We'll call it the be, do, have model. A lot of you might have seen this before. Be, this is your being, right? What your beliefs are, what your attitudes are, what you hold to be sacred. Now, these beliefs drive your behaviors, right? We'll call it the do. So behaviors is one we love because we see it, right? We can measure behaviors. A lot of your companies are running, leadership development with 360-degree feedback and psychometrics, et cetera, because behaviors are actually observable, right? I can see how someone is acting. What I can't see is what are their fundamental beliefs that got them to act in that way. And ultimately, it drives your results, your habit. So if I fundamentally believe that to be healthy, I need to work out and eat in a certain way, that's going to drive my behaviors. So therefore, what I do, how I move around, what I consume, which you can see, is actually driven through my behaviors, right? And that'll get the result that we're after. So we really need to be keen in understanding these aspects at an organizational level. So I'll give you a little a view of what we did at Syngenta. So we knew that the end result we're looking for is customer centricity. The customers and farmers around the world who really work tirelessly 7 days a week, right? Not a whole lot of time off. We need to ensure that they are in the center of every thought, of every action, of everything we do. So the fundamental belief that needs to support that is the customer's success is my success, right? So it's not about, hey, I got to make numbers. It's not going to help the farmers, but you know what? It's going to make my numbers. That needs to be flipped around, right? It needs to be absolutely linked. And then we thought about what are the behaviors that drive that. I did a lot of work listening to the employees. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but listening to employees across the organization and understanding from leaders, what are those fundamental behaviors when we are at our best and really maintaining customer success in the center and really getting to customer centricity. And this is where agility plays a role, right? And customer centricity is at the heart of the agile method, if you think about it, or the agile mindset, even more importantly. And these are the ones we came out with. You could have a different set or argue that one is more important than another, but so far we feel these are quite strong, right? So it's curiosity. Curiosity is I'm going to withhold judgment and actually listen, right, to see if I can learn something differently. I'm going to experiment, which means I might mess it up sometimes. I might not get it right, but I'm going to try a couple different things, and I can go ahead and try because I feel empowered. The next one. Now, empowerment doesn't mean, hey, you give me the power, I do whatever I want. It means I need to be accountable for what I'm doing, right? Because I'm trying to do it for the right reason and aligned with our values, et cetera. And then sense of urgency. Not only in agility, but right now in the business, the pace hasn't really slowed down, right? We need to continue. And again, coming from a place of privilege, there's a lot of people struggling in businesses around the world, as we know. The economy's taken a big hit. But these aspects of working through and driving a sense of urgency into the market, I think is particularly important. So this is what we looked at. Now we looked at some of these fundamental beliefs that are holding us back. We might need to reframe and reshift, but this is our focus. But then something happens, right? Market disruption, competitive threat, or a global pandemic, right? So this is something that we're facing now that most of us haven't in our lifetimes at this scale, certainly. Disrupting industries, workforce, obviously, supply chains are being threatened. So what happens? What do you do when you're after a big shift in your culture towards customer centricity and towards agility, and you have this kind of threat? Well, the aspect for me is it's actually a threat and an opportunity, right? The threat is real, right? It is disrupting employees, the workforce, leaders, connectivity, collaboration, our go-to-market through supply chain. So there's and financial markets, right? Look at the impact on financial markets. But there really is an opportunity to be had here if we actually pay attention and reflect. But I also want to look at the lens of time, right? So let's look a little bit about what we can learn from the past, what we're currently experiencing, and what does that mean for the future, again, through the lens of culture. So with that, I'm going to take a step back in history a little bit and talk about yesterday. Now, Peter Drucker, a lot of you will know, management guru, said the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, It is to act with yesterday's logic. Right? So, as we come in here, we say, okay, yeah, we can act with yesterday's logic. And I appreciate, obviously Peter Drucker, and that quote is spot on. But there's something about the past that really can be helpful, right? In change management, we'll call it change history assessment or a change legacy assessment, right? This is when we go into, as a consultant, we'd go into organizations and say, hey, can I hear more about your past? What's happened in the past when you've had major disruptions? What have you learned? How did your employees react? How did your stakeholders react? What did your leaders do, right? So really taking a view in the past so that we can learn, and I call that legacy learning, and how this can help us going forward. Personally, I remember, I worked as a consultant in one of the big, large consulting firms in New York City in 2001, right, during the September 11th attacks. And I remember it being very disruptive at the time. I was traveling every week out to clients, and we really said, whoa, this is, we had these fundamental beliefs. Here we go now with the beliefs, behaviors, outcomes. We had these fundamental beliefs that, well, if I can't be in front of my client, if I can't get on a plane and step out in front of my client, then I cannot be helpful, right? And therefore, I'm helpless and I won't get the outcome that we need. And back then, again, this is 19 years ago, we didn't have all the technology that we do today to really easily connect us. So we started exploring and playing with some of these, and we started finding ways that we can actually lean into our resilience here and help our clients, because our clients were obviously struggling as well, and we were able to find workarounds, right? So I remember thinking and working through all these things, reflecting on it quite a bit. 8 years later, I was working with clients in Mexico, and that was the H1n1 pandemic, the flu pandemic, if you remember, and it was a swine flu, and it was particularly hard in Mexico. And we were on the verge of going down there to really run some big sessions with a client. And when this happened, we said, hey, let's look back in history. What did we do? This happened to us 8 years ago. We were grounded. Did we find a way around? How did we react? And we were able to really pull from the past and pull forward some learnings on what worked and what didn't work, let's be honest, right? Just like experimenting, to bring us forward and ingrain some of those lessons that would help us in the current situation. And I remember we actually were able, this is the advent of telepresence was becoming a thing. We were able to really manage discussion and come to the support of our clients in spite of what we could have done in the past. Again, learning from what we did in the past. Very helpful lesson, and it brings us to today, right? So today, and Viktor Frankl, wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychologist. He was in a concentration camp during the Second World War, and he wrote, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I love that quote. It's one of my favorite quotes for many reasons. But in this one, okay, we see stimulus and we see response. And what he says is, well, it's that space in between where you really stop and pause and learn, right? And this is where we are now. Now, at some point in the future, we'll look back and we'll reflect. Obviously, this is something huge that we will all discuss with our grandkids for years to come. But right now, we're in the middle of it, right? So how do we lean into this aspect so that one day when we look back at this, we'll take the same lessons from our past, right? One way we're doing it is actually to engage and listen. Now, as I said, we dug a lot of interesting data from our previous once a year, once every 2 years employee engagement survey, as many of you probably do. And we got some good data from that helped us really understand what our current beliefs are. But we needed to switch that, and we did. As it turns out, we know our friends Arjen and team from Effectory, because we're working with them on this, where they helped us with the technology, and we're actually able to listen in a different way, right? And note it's listen, right? It's not employee engagement survey. You tell me what's wrong and I fix it. It's actually how do we engage and continuously and get closer to continuously listen so that we're having a conversation. And we're able to really drive what's happening today to be helpful tomorrow. Now, we were about to launch a global survey around this to start our listening program and really get deep. This is something new. But in the midst of this, we said, well, it doesn't make sense to ask all these questions, but we still have an opportunity and we still should be listening. So we actually are running a volunteer type survey where we said, we're going to link to employees where needed by leadership teams that are interested in hearing, and start doing some of the work around this, we'll call it a COVID survey. Go out and see how are people really dealing with this. Back to my example of going to Mexico and thinking back to the September 11th attacks to remember, what did we do? This institutional learning, we're actually able now to capture it in a different way and actually get some data. And at the same time, really listen to and engage our employees to support them wherever we can, right? And the next one is respond and learn, right? So we're not just listening for some future date. We're actually trying to understand what are they going with and through so that we can support as best we can, and we can learn from the situation from some future aspect, right? So the responding is incredibly important, and I want you to take that away. We're doing this not for future data. We're doing this because our employees are vitally important, obviously, as to most of you, I would expect, in a way that we really need to understand what the current needs are, what the situation is, and how we can help, right? And these lessons from the past, I know, will be invaluable in the future. Now, I don't want to get philosophical. There's a view that there's no such thing as the present. As soon as you experience something, it's already past, right? So the real key here is listening, is really being present and not doing something every X amount of time, but really, really leaning into this. And why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it for the future, right? So we're doing it as well, as I said, beyond responding, to really get some institutional knowledge. And here I'll take a quote from David Bowie, actually, deceased rock star. I mean, he said, "Tomorrow belongs to those who can hear it coming." Right? So you hear it coming because you're able to pay attention today, right? And we talk a lot about learning organizations, right? How do we actually embed learning? And this is about content, and this is about learning systems and learner experience. But we're really thinking about flipping that around and reminding ourselves of organizational learning, right? What did we learn from the past, and how do we use that to ingrain into the future? So we're doing a lot of thinking about, well, okay, Kurt Levine famously talked about unfreezing, making some changes, and refreezing as a change model. Well, we've been unfrozen by all this, right? What learning will we look to anchor in the future based on what we're seeing now? And this is what the work of tomorrow is. How do we actually lean into this? A perfect example, and I'll get back to the cultural model, is empowerment. I mentioned empowerment up there, and I mentioned some of these aspects of our behaviors. Well, in the fundamental beliefs for a lot of managers might be, well, if you're working from home, it means you're not really working, right? Unless I see you in the office, I see when you show up, and I see when you leave, I don't actually believe that you're working, right? And this is the kind of belief that drives the behavior, that I'm going to check when you come in and go, that I'm going to ensure that, this flexible working is not a thing that I'm going to support. Well, this has been turned upside down, right? So now those beliefs are starting to shift, not because we put a poster on the wall or we're telling managers and leaders. It's because people are living it. They're understanding that their beliefs have been shaken, and that they're really starting to understand, oh, you know what? I really can shift to this empowering style. So what do? Maybe you have a morning and an afternoon call with your managers, but that's not really sustainable for a lot of us, right? So little by little, managers are understanding, wow, they really need to let go. And empowering means something quite different. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And you could also see it in systems, right? How do we think about flexible work arrangements now after this is done, right? So we can actually start making choiceful decisions to embed some of these behaviors, right? What we're encouraging, what we're discouraging, and what we're tolerating. And this is a time where we're all really thinking about ourselves and saying, "Ooh, I thought we had to be in the office. I thought all of us had to be in a room to have a meeting. I thought I can connect one-on-one in a deep way," right? So we're really looking at this opportunity to say, okay, well, what beliefs are challenged? How do we now ensure that we ingrain them before we snap back, right? Because at the end of the day, we start shifting until our beliefs change. We'll test, but we'll go back to our old ways because that's the way we are often wired. So here's an opportunity for us to say, well, as we're seeing things shift, right? So we see that manager who all of a sudden said, oh, you know what? In the last 8 weeks, I've really shaken my beliefs. I've seen my team really step up and support each other, because not everyone can and work at the same pace. to really call out for help, but also empower themselves to move forward and really drive value for our company and for our employees. So that's been unbelievable learning. And now that those behaviors, we continue to reinforce them when we start, hopefully slowly going back into an environment that'll look different, right? That's why you hear it called the new normal or the next normal. But we have an opportunity and a choice here to make something different at every level. So, I'll leave you with this, with the final, 3 thoughts, and then love to hear your comments and your questions. So just by bit of summary, look back to learn. Let's not assume the past gave us no clues to how we should behave today and in the future. It's been absolutely a learning experience for us. And we really need to take this opportunity to look back and take those lessons and apply them, right? Including those that didn't work. We know, as I said, not everything in the past worked, but that's a lesson as well. You learn often more from your failures than you do from your successes, right? The second one, again, is listen today to understand. Now, it's listening to understand, and I could have said respond because we are responding. I could have said learn because we will learn from this, but it really is to understand. And that's about that curiosity piece I spoke about. How do we listen with a curious mindset, withholding judgment, to understand what's going on? How do we sense, especially when, I can look and sense around me if I want, but I'm sitting here alone in my living room on my laptop. So listening to an organization, listening at scale, becomes quite different than seeing how people are reacting on the floor or by the coffee machine. So we really need to lean into this aspect. And finally, leveraging this learnings from the past to architect the future. And this is key, right? It's architect because we can actually define and design some of these aspects, right? From what we've learned. We can decide that we lean into and amplify this view of, what? We can actually level the playing field and work from home. With that typical meeting where we had all of us in the room, but 2 of us or 3 of us from the regions would dial in and we would forget about them because, they're on the screen, but we're so energized by our conversation that they now just melt into the background. Well, why not have those sessions now, for example, on Zoom or on Teams or on any other platform that we're leveraging? So we'll start really shaking our beliefs, and we can architect some of these things and design them into systems, as we can do, into processes, and into behaviors, right? Into how we talk to our employees, how we develop our leaders, and how we engage our leadership teams. So these are the 3 points, and I think with that, I'll pause. I feel like I've been talking forever, but I'm really excited about the continuation of the discussion here with all of us.
Perfect. Am I good? Yeah. All right. Sorry, Ricardo. I was just checking the text. So I think this was, well, on the one hand, hugely inspiring, but also very practical. So I think a lot of people will definitely have let's say, a practical setup to understand, okay, we need to use the learnings to influence our culture. There's a lot of questions popping in, and I'm just going to read out a few to you, and let's see where we take the discussions from there, if that's all right for you.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm starting with Julia because she's asking a practical question on the impact for Syngenta. So her question is, so what is the impact of the global lockdown measures for the culture Syngenta is striving for? And how do you anticipate?
Yeah, no, good question. The real fast answer is we don't know, right? We'll see. We're still in the middle of it. One of the discussions we just had with the leadership team here was we often assume that we're all in this together, but it's actually very, very different, right? I mean, I have very, very close friends and families in New York City, and in Madrid, and in the UK, three places that have been hit tremendously hard. As we see some of the offices going back to work, their assumption going in is like, oof, we're finally back. In some countries, are just now entering the issue, right? So we're not going to see this for a while. What I can say is that we, from the work, almost 1/3 of our current Syngenta organization, we've actually touched through some of these COVID surveys, and we've seen an incredible rise in support and in compassion and empathy, unlike we've seen in the past, maybe because we're measuring it differently now. But we're able to see that, we really are supporting each other as colleagues, as peers, as leaders. And because of that, we're able to find a balance where we are still maintaining the supply chains, and we're still driving the business that we need to drive after strong business results coming into this, knowing that our farmers and our customers really need our help. So I think we are seeing a really positive view. And I'm not going to paint everything roses. There's a lot of personal health issues. There's a lot of individual mental issues. So, for example, we're leaning into our diversity and inclusion work around mental health, right? Which is another great aspect. We're actually voicing these conversations. It's becoming okay to speak about mental health and say, I'm struggling here with my children while I'm homeschooling, and other peers are able to step up and say, you know what, it's okay. We'll contact and work with you around your time. So to that question, I say too early to tell, but it's definitely trending in a very positive direction, and I'm very happy to see it.
Wow, cool. So just a personal reflection is how did you get your managers to also allow this kind of behavior? Did that go by nature, or did you kind of guide them towards that? Yeah, to support that kind of discussion.
Yeah, and as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I think,
for sure.
It's been one of those beliefs that primarily are held by most, whether or not they did before, right? So we go into meetings, we don't have the option of micromanaging, right? I said, unless you're placing calls, and people you could still see at the beginning, still all of a sudden, your son runs behind you and the noise. In the past, we'd say, oh, wow, I saw somebody walk in the background there. Yeah, we've come to see that as normal, right? So I think, it wasn't, hey, all managers from now on, allow flexibility in remote working. They didn't have a choice, right? Yeah. Since they are remote working, you should manage your team this way. No, that's the empowerment piece. We're going to allow and empower the managers to run the teams as they see fit. But what we've seen from the collective positive peer pressure, I'll say, from others, is to say, oh, wow, we really are finding a way where we're empowering in these times and being more flexible and ensuring that people are okay and being compassionate when they're not, because we know it's okay to not be okay, has really, I think, shifted the tone for a lot of people.
I can imagine. I think if I look back at the companies that we work with, they're of course reporting about loss of productivity or effectiveness, but it's mainly also on the topics where they said, well, the priority and the urgency was already not on those specific ones, but now they actually have a way of voicing, well, maybe on the one hand, the personal situation from their coworkers, but on the other hand, also to reflect on, okay, guys, this is now the focus of what we want to do, and that's what they move forward with, and they leave behind the stuff. Yeah, in good times, you also tend to focus on stuff which might not be as relevant as that we realize now, to say, well, to guarantee business continuity, at least these are the things that we really need to take care of. Is that something, a behavior you see as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit quite a few good topics there. One is this, effectiveness, productivity, right? So it's really shaking the way. Hold on, is productivity how many hours you spend in the office? Yeah. Or is it the outcomes you produce and the value you drive, right? So this is really shifting that discussion. And then what do you focus that on, which is the last piece you mentioned there, is this concept of, I'll call it essentialism, right? How do we really focus on priority? Because, I do my priorities at the beginning of the year, and I have too many of them to honestly handle maybe. And then all of a sudden we're saying, well, hold on, if I can only do a few things, what do I do? So I think productivity and efficiency and effectiveness are things that will really be tested, and we'll see them in a different light. And I think how we measure these things, I mentioned performance management earlier, and how we come out on the other end, actually understanding what really is essential, will shift, I think, at some point in some areas dramatically over the coming months and years.
And do you see then a big difference? I mean, you mentioned 2001, 2008. We're now talking 2020. Do you see big differences between these crises in terms of impact on business continuity?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues, the biggest differences, I'd say, is just the global scale of this, right? I mean, September 11th obviously was a huge one for certain aspects of the world, around security, around mobility. And for us as New Yorkers, living in Manhattan and being so close to the aftermath was obviously that hit us very, very personally. For sure. For the rest of the world, short of all the folks I always see that go on vacation and, to see where this actually happened, or in the pandemic that hit some countries and was kept away in 2008 from many other countries, nobody is spared. There's no socioeconomic geographical boundary that has really prevented this from hitting everyone. So I do think the scale of and the economic repercussions of what we're currently going through are going to be felt beyond what we've seen in the past, for sure.
Great, thanks. So I got a few questions, so I just gonna see which ones most address your presentation as well. So this is, I think, interesting as well to see from a cultural perspective. Anne is asking us, so can you actually talk about let's say one company culture when you're working in an organization that has 20 to 50,000 people? What's your view on that? Is there one company culture here?
And perfect discussion, right? So what does that really mean, right? You say company culture, and you can define it on a wall chart. You can put it in a plaque, but there's nothing that will absolutely define all of it. Why? Because there are business units, there are regions, there are countries, there's geographical culture, there's personal views. So there is not one size fits all. I mentioned earlier, there's 4 business units. They all are operating in different parts of the world. So what we're looking at is there are some potentially non-negotiables that bind us, and then there's a whole lot of shifts across the entire landscape. So those non-negotiables for us are, as I mentioned, customer centricity, right? How do we really focus on the customer? How do we really include and involve a culture of safety? Better than ever, certainly in production you see it, but more than ever now that every single one of our employees gets to, at the end of the day, say, "Oof, I was cared for and I felt safe," right? That we are adapting, right? This is the agility piece going forward, right? That we're able to ensure that it's an inclusive culture, that everyone can bring their best aspect of themselves to work every day, and they won't be seen as anything other than great colleagues. So there are some things in the core that you can say, yeah, this. You can talk about, the culture of fill in the blank, your favorite company, and you could call out a few specific attributes. And if you go in, you feel it, right? Because you see the way people behave, you see what the systems and artifacts are. But of course, there are things that are going to vary dramatically across the different geographies and the different parts of your business.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of a combination of the national culture combined with the business aspects set out by leadership, I guess, by the top management, and then slowly pacing through to the lowest levels of the company, let's say, to the individual employee to feel that they're part of that culture. On the other hand, should it then be that you're also looking out for employees that fit with your culture? How do you look at that? Like, do you take this into account for your whole recruitment process, for instance?
Yeah, great question. And 2 things I'll touch on there. First, you mentioned the top-down approach. Often the case, not necessarily always, but one thing for sure is that the top leadership must absolutely buy into and role model the behaviors of the culture you want, right? I can't think of any company who has really had a positive shift in their culture without a buy-in from their most senior leaders. So I would say that is absolutely a truism. And your second question was around.
So how do you trickle it down? And then in terms of recruitment, do you then do you define the culture and then find people to fit with it? Or do the people find you because they fit with the culture?
Correct. I'm not a fan at all of cultural fit. And I'm actually stealing this from Adam Grant, an IO Psych guy from Wharton. A lot of your listeners might know. But he says, you should look for cultural contribution, not cultural fit. So I don't want someone that's like me because, as the saying goes, if 2 people are identical, one is unnecessary, right? So I think you really need to ensure that you're bringing in a diverse set of people that can actually even challenge your culture and make it better. So it's this aspect, again, of cultural contribution. How do you add something to us that we don't have versus how do I look for a mold that looks like everybody else that's in the place? So no, I would never think about hiring for cultural fit per se.
Cool. Good point. So Mary is asking us, we're listening a lot to our employees. how do we prioritize all the input? Our main challenge is to find the right priorities.
Yeah, good question. And this is the aspect of employee listening and really driving a conversation, right? Because I think the old contract for companies was, I'm going to go out and pulse everyone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the senior leaders will then look at it, theme it, and say, aha, these are the three things. We'll solve all your problems, hopefully. And if we can't, then you might be upset or not, right? How do we shift that contract to say, listen, back to the empowerment? Let's have the conversation. Let's all be really clear of what we're able to do. And one of the things I love about, I know your solution, Arjen, in Effectory, is that even individuals can get their own personal dashboards, managers, senior managers. So we're actually having a dialogue off of the same data, right? We're all looking. It's not someone else in a dark room somewhere looks at it and gives it back to you. We're all seeing the same data, right? And then there's that aspect of, the question was a good one from Mary around prioritizing. I think that gets prioritized at different levels, right? So I'll give you an example. There are some aspects of, we are absolutely not looking at the right way to manage performance, and as an organization, that needs to be addressed at a very high level to see, okay, how do we get our best thinking in conjunction with the employee point of view and really put forward a process or a solution that will help and be fit for purpose for the organization. Other ones will actually be the ownership of either the individual employee or the managers, right? So someone asked me, hey, we're doing one of these COVID surveys, and what if somebody says, hey, the problem is, my chair is uncomfortable and I don't have the right table for my computer in order to work. Well, we're not expecting as a leadership team to buy new chairs and furniture for everyone, but we're able to empower that team and that manager to have a discussion and say, okay, so it sounds like you're spending way too much in front of the video camera in these meetings. How do we lower that burden so that you can work comfortably, still integrate with the things you need to do at home, but we find a better way to get to a solution. So this is where, and I've seen perfect examples. I had a colleague in a leadership team who young children really struggled to be able to meet some of the times of the meetings that were up. And the team came to the aid and said, hey, how do we then move and work around your time? And they respected the boundaries of that time where she was able to connect or not. Again, nothing that's going to be defined or decided at a corporate board level, but something that very far in the organization, teams and managers can actually support.
So it's actually, I'm seeing a relationship with trust. And we talked about this with Kilian Wawu as well, where he said, well, in order to find the right performance, you have to trust your people as well, that they will put in the best that they can and also find solutions themselves. So I'm kind of relating to trusting your people in this case to empower them, maybe also give them the autonomy to take decisions by themselves instead of having to rely on their higher level management to make sure that they actually take the decisions that they need to continue the business in the best way possible. Kind of relating maybe even to holacracy, where you leave your employees to define what's happening on the work floor. Maybe it's a bit taken too far, but I can imagine that this autonomy, empowerment also relates to a high level of what you said, urgency, and maybe a need for transparency. Is that something that you see if you're becoming more transparent, that this will roll into employees will become more autonomous and also take ownership by themselves because they know what they're up to?
Yeah, a lot of things there to unpack and really good. So I think trust is at the center, and we have to really understand and unpack what does that mean, right? And this is why we have multiple behaviors, including the experimentation one, which includes this aspect of learning through doing it wrong or failure, as some would say. So trust doesn't mean, hey, I trust you're going to do it right, but if you do it wrong, you're in trouble, right? Yeah. It really means, I trust that you understand and are moving in the right direction, knowing that it might not work out, right? And then we'll have to go back and see what we can do. So really, we're trying to understand what trust means, and trust also doesn't mean, yes, I trust and I'm going to empower you, but when you make a mistake, I'm going to take that empowerment away and then I'll make the calls. Yeah. What this puts into play is the shifting role of the leaders, right? And this is, change 101, right? The first thing you do in a change program, it's really define that vision, right? And the vision usually clarifies the future. This has changed because the future is sometimes ambiguous. We don't know how this is going to is going to play out. This is what we call emergent change, right? But the leaders now really need to get into place of defining that goal, that intent, and then supporting and allowing the employees through trust to get there. And then you mentioned transparency, something we're working with a lot, which is what's this operational transparency? Don't just go away and eventually show up with something, and then I say, ooh, that's not right. This is where Agile comes in. How do we work together, continue to iterate so that I can see what's happening, right? A perfect example for me is a local pizza delivery, right? That has this app. And you've all seen this, I'm sure, wherever you are at some level, perhaps. I order a pizza and then I sit there and say, well, when's that pizza going to come? I keep looking out the window. Now you have an app that tells you, oh, I got your order. We're now making it. It's in the oven. It's now out for delivery. And I have a view, operational transparency of what's happening. And this brings me a sense of calm, but also gives me an opportunity to now input into the system. So I think that's another shift that we're going to continue to see more of.
Wow. So I think so. A few weeks ago, I think you mentioned it, or maybe you've seen the webinar as well. We talked with Tom Haak about using the crisis as an accelerator. And back then, it was the first weeks of the crisis. People were still a bit afraid of, what's going to happen, and of course, still are, I guess. But he predicted a few things, including these kind of. Well, you're on the same line here. New ways of organizing, focus on personalization, like these kind of apps where you can see what's happening, more transparency. And also using more analytics to make sure that we are better able to personalize. And I guess that's something that you're using as well then to make sure that you can really dig down to what's the essence of what you need to continue the business for Syngenta globally as well.
Yeah, you mentioned analytics, and we work very closely, obviously, with our people inside an analytics group to look at this, right? But one thing I do want to comment in what you said is, absolutely, it's an opportunity as well as a threat, and obviously this has been confirmed by some of your other speakers. But we have to be really clear that we're still in it, that it's still very ambiguous, and that we need to recognize that very different parts of the business and different people are in very different places. Some are struggling more than others. So, it's easy to take a privileged view of saying, yes, we're now going to accelerate our business based on all the learnings we had. And I think we can. I think we can architect some choiceful moves, but we also need to be very careful of the speed at which we move going forward, so as to not kind of undo and unwind all of a sudden this compassion that we've been feeling from supporting each other globally, and then going back into this ultra-competitive view. So I do think we need to do that, and how we do it, again, it goes back to really, really listening to our employees, to our customers, and making sure that we're moving at a pace that allows everyone, again, to do their best work and perform.
Yeah. Very valuable comment. So actually, we're going to the end. So we're out of time. I'm really sorry. I found this hugely inspiring. So I think we can keep talking about this for the next hours if we need to or want to. But for now, I really want to thank you, Ricardo, for your inspiring story, also sharing the lessons learned that you had over time, not only from Syngenta, but also from the time you worked here before as a international global consultant. So thank you very much. And I'm really hoping and looking forward that we see each other back on the webinar or in real time anytime soon. Let's hope so, that the situation allows to. I want to thank you guys in the audience as well. Thanks a lot for all your questions. Next week, we will have Alison Annen. She's the head coach of the Dutch Olympic hockey team. You might remember them from the last Olympics. They've been winning big prizes over the years, and she's been at the steering side of making sure that they achieve these performances. And next week, she will talk about how you make a team perform. How do you find performance behavior? So how do you get everybody to perform in the best way possible? But also, how do you form a team that fits with each other? Everybody has different personalities. Ricardo just mentioned teams exist of different people. Everybody has their own ideas about what's contributing to the success. And I think she will share a lot of valuable lessons of how to manage your teams. So I'm looking forward for you guys to check in next week. Finally, if you want to see the recording back, visit our YouTube or register, and you will get an email with the link so you can view back on the lessons that Ricardo shared. Thanks a lot, guys, again, and I will see you again next week. See ya.
Thank you so much, Arjen. This is great.